I went from being the type of UFC fan that never missed a card, and the type of fan that could tell you about most unranked prospects in the UFC, to being someone who just ends up watching the final 3 fights of a card. I just don't feel engaged or excited anymore. I've been following the sport for going on 15 years, and I never thought I'd see the UFC in the state that it's in. Ads absolutely everywhere, paid-for tweets taking up a chunk of the screen mid-fight, ad reads in the middle of fights, stagnant fighter pay, lopsided sponsorship deals that hardly benefit fighters, bad matchmaking, and boring fight night cards. The UFC has lost all of its soul since it was sold. I almost had a stroke during UFC 285, when I had to listen to Jon Anik do advertisements for Cocaine Bear at the start of every fight. Let's start off by talking about Powerslap. I've had to unsubscribe from their YouTube channel because of Powerslap. It is rammed down your throat more than actual fighting. It makes no sense to shove a different sport down people's throats on the official UFC pages. Even during press conferences, it seems like Dana always lights up when somebody asks him about the slap league. Everything else he has no idea on. There's a lot of fans that have become disenchanted with Dana White, mainly to do with decisions surrounding matchups, and top contenders and champions defending their belts. The best fighters rarely actually fight each other. Matchmaking has really become a joke. The roster is bloated with mediocre talent, while the UFC refuses to pay to keep top 10 fighters. Go back 10 years and look at the pay-per-view cards. Virtually every fight had a named fighter. I tend to measure MMA popularity based on how friends and family talk about the sport, and perhaps it's my own anecdotal experiences, but I don't see much buzz from it these days. I think a big reason why it doesn't seem as exciting is because there's too many events. Remember when UFC cards were something fans looked forward to for months? It seems so long ago. Now there's a fight card nearly every week. It seems too much to fans, and many cards get overlooked. The UFC should be stacking their cards from top to bottom. Do a world tour with the fighters like they do for many of McGregor's fights to get fans talking. This is what they should do, but just like most American sports, the pursuit of profit and greed ruins the core of what makes a sport fun to watch. So let's talk about the ESPN deal. The ESPN deal turned the UFC away from being a pay-per-view promoter. There's no more incentive to build stars. The problem with the UFC being sold to an entertainment company is they don't seem to understand the fight game. They see more belts as more money. The UFC is handing out interim belts when they aren't necessary. Top fighters are still partners on events, even though the UFC's revenue structure has completely shifted away. Meanwhile, Dana is building his own brand as much as possible. The ESPN deal means the UFC have a safety net. They're no longer reliant on the superstars selling events, and they no longer have the up and downs of cards that don't attract casual fans. UFC became a disgrace a long time ago when they took the fighters' sponsorships away and started running ads during the fights. They clearly don't need my money if they're going to run ads every possible minute. It's quantity over quality and more focus shifting towards the brand and consistent availability of fights, as opposed to the more emotional connection between fans and star fighters. I miss the anticipation and the feeling of connecting to the fighters, which was easier and more common in the golden era when there were less fighters, less events, less weight classes, etc. It feels like Jon is the last of the UFC's golden era. People are interested in him because he reminds us of that time. When he's done, the UFC is in big trouble. They've done a terrible job of grooming and promoting the next wave. The rise of Ronda, Conor and Brock was amazing to watch, along with fighters such as Anderson, GSP, Aldo, Nick Diaz, and so many more. I'm not sure the UFC will ever reach those heights again, no matter what they do. Basically, they won't get their breakout star until they start buying talent and risking it outside of protected narratives. But they aren't going to take financial risks and buy up talent until they have a breakout star. So something has to change, or they're going to find themselves on equal cultural footing with some other promotion before the decade is out. It happened in boxing and it'll happen here, and it's crazy to think that the UFC is untouchable, just because it has been till now. They have such a short-sighted approach. This is going to be their biggest problem in the future. They're not recruiting or attracting any new talent, and their pay scale and bonus structure isn't even keeping up with inflation. Light heavyweight and heavyweight are already devoid of talent. Soon the pipeline for other divisions will dry up. UFC certainly doesn't have the best fighting the best, and it will become more and more obvious in the future. None of the current champions in the UFC have the same level of star power as McGregor, so it's difficult for the UFC to bring in the same level of viewership as McGregor would when he headlines. And even rising stars such as Sean O'Malley and Hamzat just don't seem as exciting. There's much less star power now because UFC won't promote anyone aside from a very small handful of intriguing matchups. Keeping up with the politics and drama feels like it needs to be a higher priority than keeping up with the fights, and nothing seems to be changing. It honestly feels like a different sport than it was even 4 years ago. So let me know what you think below. Feel free to add anything I may have missed in this video, and don't forget to subscribe.